Hello and welcome. I'm Dave. Today we will create a Python web app with Flask, and I'll provide links to all resources in the description below. I've got VS Code open. You can see I have a new folder for lesson 23, the final lesson of this Python series and course. So it's the final project, and there's so much you can do with Python, and there's always something new to learn. But I feel like this course has provided you with all of the fundamentals you'll need to keep moving forward in your programming journey. So with today's project, we're going to build this Python web app with a popular Python web framework called Flask. A couple of lessons back, we learned about virtual environments, and in that lesson, we retrieved current weather conditions for cities, but we needed to use the terminal window. Today, our web app will do the same. It will retrieve weather conditions for cities, but we'll deploy it to the web so you can share your project with everyone. Let's go back to VS Code and get started. In VS Code, let's open a terminal window with Control in the backtick, and we want to create our virtual environment as we've learned about before. We want to do this right away, so I'll type Py. If you're in a Mac or a Linux environment, you might have to type Python 3, I believe. But then we'll have -m for module, then venv, and then .venv, and I'll press enter. It should create a folder over here in your folder for lesson 23 or whatever you called it, and now we have a virtual environment. So let's go ahead and activate that environment as well. So I'm going to type source, then .venv, and then scripts with a capital S. Now that's because I'm on Windows, and I'd mentioned this during the lesson on creating a virtual environment, but I don't think I mentioned that if you're on Linux and possibly Mac, I think instead of scripts, this might need to say bin, as in bin. So here we'll say activate and press enter. This should activate the virtual environment. Now I can press enter one more time and I should see, yes, it says .venv in parentheses underneath after I pressed enter. So I do know it is active. And we've also learned about pip, and we need to install a few packages we're going to use today. So I'm going to type pip install, and then after that, I'm going to type requests, and then python-.env, because I'm going to need that as well, and then also Flask with a capital F. Okay, that quickly updated. It's also giving us a message about pip, so if we want to run that, we can. So I'll type py-m, then pip install dash capital U is the same as 2 dashes and upgrade, and then pip once again. Press enter and it should go ahead and update that installation as well. And now we're going to deploy our project today. So in order to do that, we also need to create a requirements.txt file. So to do that, I'm going to type pip freeze and then the greater than sign, then requirements.txt, and it should quickly create a requirements file that we see over here in the tree, and this should list the packages. So when we deploy this, of course, remember, we won't send our virtual environment folder to GitHub, but we will send our other code, including this requirement. So when this is deployed and it gets to our host, then the host will see what needs to be installed as we deploy our Python project. And so now I mentioned we will not send .venv to GitHub, so I'm going to create a gitignore file, which starts with a dot as well, then gitignore, and then inside of this file, I'm going to list the .venv, so that is not added to a repository when we create one. And if you're not familiar with Git and GitHub, I do have a tutorial on my channel for that as well that you can check out. Now, one other file we're going to create is a .env file, and that's where we hold environment variables. And you never want to share those. Those are your secrets that are linked to your account, and we're going to have an account at the Open Weather Map API. So I want to type .env in here as well, and this will be a file we create that will hold our Open Weather Map API key. Now we never want to share that with anyone. So here, I'm just going to create this file and say .env. And now it's listed over here. Now, I don't know if you have Git installed or not. Git was not a prerequisite to take this course. So if you're not familiar with Git and GitHub, you may not want to deploy this project today. You may want to go back and learn about Git and GitHub and then come back and deploy this later. Now, I already have Git installed, so I'm going to go ahead and initialize a Git repository, and then you'll see these files that we've included in the gitignore turn gray because they will not be sent to GitHub in the future like our other files will. So I'm going to once again open the terminal and then just type git init, and that will initialize my Git repository here inside of this folder for our project. And you can see these are green, meaning that they are new files in our repository. Now, this tutorial is not about Git specifically, so I don't want to get any deeper into that right now. We want to go ahead and create this project. But right now, we need to go ahead and get an Open Weather Map API key if you don't already have one from the previous tutorials. I'm in Chrome at openweathermap.org. Now, if you completed this just a couple of tutorials back when we got our API key, you can skip this part. But if you haven't, you're going to need an API key. Notice I'm already signed in up here and I've got my name, Dave. Now you can get a free account and then sign in here if you don't have one. But there's a drop menu and now it says My API Keys. I'm going to delete any API key that I show you because you never want to share those. But I'm going to click My API Keys. And you see I have one here called My New Weather Key. And here's the key. So once you generate one of your own, if you don't already have one in your account, go ahead and copy it right here. I'm just double clicking and then doing Control-C to copy. We're going to put this in our .env file back in Visual Studio Code. Back in VS Code, I'm in my .env file. I'm going to type API_key with all caps and then equals, and then Control-V to just paste in that API key. Notice no quotes around this, but it will be considered a string. Now we'll refer to this later, and I can go ahead and close all of these files out. Now we need to create a couple of specially named folders over here in our file tree. So let's click the new folder icon. Let's name this first folder Static. Oh, and I need lowercase now. So there we go, Static. The next folder we need to create should be called Templates. And so I've got templates, I'll press enter, and we have the two folders. Now first, static, this holds any static file. That means non-changing. So it can be CSS, JavaScript, images, any type of file like that. So to organize those files inside of static, I usually create more folders. So I'll create one inside of this called CSS because I'm going to create a CSS file inside of the static folder. So I've got static CSS, and then we'll eventually create a file in there as well. But now templates is where we're going to store our HTML files. And with that, we're going to insert some values from Python into those HTML files and use those as templates for our web page. So let's start by creating our CSS file. So I'll click on the CSS folder. Now I want a new file. I'm going to name this style.css. Now this is not a CSS course. I do have a CSS course on my channel, and it's also been published on Free Code Camp, so you can check that out. I'm going to just paste in some very simple CSS styles. You can see I have a very simple CSS reset here if you're familiar with CSS. If you're not, of course you can copy this CSS code from my repository for this lesson if you want to. I've got several styles applied to the body of the HTML page, and then I've got a few styles applied specifically to the input and the button as well. Now if you see a white dot, that means you need to save the file, so I'm going to Control-S just to save that file. Now let's click on the templates folder. I'm going to create a new file inside named index.html. So this will be the home page that everyone sees when they load our web app. Now, if you're using VS Code to create an HTML page, you can use a shortcut here that's called emit, and emit has several commands. I'm just going to type a exclamation mark, which is an emit abbreviation. And with this abbreviation, or shortcut if you will, I can press tab, and I quickly get the outline, or the skeleton, if you want to say that, for a web page. So here's Alt-Z to just wrap that down so we can see the full line without going off of the screen. Now I'm just going to fill in some information here. So for the title, I'm going to say Git Weather Conditions. And now besides that, we're going to put a link to our style sheet. And this is a little different even if you have written some HTML and CSS before. So this is specific to how we're going to work with Flask today and how it inserts some values. So here I'm going to say link, then I'm going to have my href, and now inside of these quotes, I'm going to use two curly braces, and I'm going to say URL underscore for, not form, but for, and then parentheses, then single quotes, the word static, and after that, I'm going to have file name equals, and then I'm going to have another set of single quotes, styles slash style.css. So it is pulling in our CSS, but this is just a little bit different than you may have written before. Now, after these two curly braces here, we need another space, and we're going to type rel, which is an attribute of the link element, and then we'll put equals. And here we just have another set of double quotes. And well, we didn't finish the other double quote. I guess I needed to end that double quote here. Sorry about that. So let's delete that extra one it added. So we've got a quote here with href, and the href ends after the two curly braces. So you want a quote there. Now we'll have our second set of double quotes. And inside of this rel, we're going to say style sheet because that's what we're linking to. And finally, at the end, we can have a slash and close out our link tag here. So that is the full link. Now, this is a little unusual compared to just linking to our styles slash style.css, but this is what Flask is going to use to insert a value here because this is a template. We will be inserting values into this file when it is called. Okay, now inside of the body of our HTML, we want to have an H1, and I'm going to say the same thing, get weather conditions. So you can just copy this from the title, Control C, click here, Control V to paste it in. Underneath that, we're going to have a simple form. So we'll have our form, and then it's going to have an action attribute right away. So inside of this, we're going to go to the /weather page when we post our data from our form. So inside of the form now, we need an input, and this input is going to be type text. That's correct. We can also give it a name equal to city. And then after that, let's give it an ID equal to city. And I need that to go inside the quotes. There we go. Then let's give it a placeholder like we saw in the example that says enter a city. And then of course we need to close out our input tag with the slash there. After that, we need a button. So we'll have our button, and it is the submit type. So VS Code wants to help, and now we have button type submit. And let's just put the word submit on the button as well. Control S to save, and we're finished with our index.html template for our app. Now we will come back and create one more HTML template very soon. But right now, we need to create a Python weather module that will retrieve the weather for any city using that Open Weather Map API. And this part's going to be very similar to what we did when we retrieved that weather and we just looked at it in the terminal window. So now over in our file tree, let's create a new file and let's call it weather.py. Let's import everything we're going to use at the top. So I'm going to say from.env, and then I'm going to import load_.env. Also going to use pretty print, so from eprint, I'm going to import eprint, and then I need to import the requests dependency that we added, and I also need to import OS. So the very first thing we want to do is load that API key value from our .env file, and that's what load.env does. So I'll just say load_.env, put the parentheses on there to call that function. Now let's go ahead and define our get current weather function. So we start with the def keyword, and I'll say get_current_weather, and now it's going to receive a parameter, and I'm going to say city, but I want to give this a default value too. Say it's just pressed enter and the form is empty. So by default, I'm going to give it my area, which is the Kansas City area. You could provide your city or your nearest large city is what I would recommend if you want to put a default value here that's different than mine. Just to avoid a typo, as I've been having lately, I'm going to paste in this URL, but let's go over the URL so you can get it accurately as well. So here we've got request_URL. Notice it's an F string. Then it goes to http://api.openweathermap.org/data/2.5/weather. And then we have a question mark, and this is where the params in the URL begin. You need to put app ID equals, then we use the OS module that we imported, and we'll say os.gitenv, and then parentheses, API key. So we're getting that environment variable right here using os.gitenv. And then we have an ampersand and then a Q, which is short for query. And then that equals the city value that was passed in, or Kansas City in my case if a value is not passed in. One more ampersand, and I set the units to imperial. Now you can look at the docs for the Open Weather Map API, because if you don't want imperial, if you want something else instead of degrees essentially for the weather, you can change this to metric, I believe. Okay, now let's go ahead and get that weather data. So we'll say weather_data equals requests.get, and we pass in our request_URL. And at the very end, we need to add .json and put parentheses to call out because we want JSON data. And then we're going to return the weather_data. So this gets the data from the Open Weather Map API. And now I said we're making a module. So to do that, let's complete this by saying if _name, and then two equal signs equals main with also the two underscores, which we've covered in this course. So if this file is called directly, weather.py, instead of calling the file that might call the entire application for the web, then we're going to go ahead and run this file as if it's at the terminal once again. So I'm going to print, and then inside of the print statement, I'm going to start with a new line, and then I'll just say, let's do 3 asterisks here and get current weather conditions, 3 more asterisks, 1 more new line. So that's just kind of a welcome to the app at the terminal window. Then we'll say city equals input, and here we'll have a new line, and please enter a city name and a colon. And after that, let's go ahead and come down and get our weather data. So weather data is going to equal get current weather data, and we're going to pass in whatever city was provided. And again, if they don't pass in a city, it should go back to our default value here of Kansas City. After that, at the very end, I just want to print, say, 1 new line, and then we'll go ahead and pretty print. Oops, don't want to do that. Having a hard time typing today. At the end, let's go ahead and pretty print our weather_data. So this is if this file is called directly, which is kind of the right thing to do for a module. This would go ahead and provide the weather data at the terminal, just like we learned how to do a couple of lessons back. But today we're going to use this get current weather function in our web app so we can get that weather data and present it on the web with a template. And now that we have our weather function, we're finally ready to start working with Flask directly. And so let's go ahead and create another new file over here, which will be the main file for the application. Sometimes people name that main.py. I'm going to name this server.py because it will be a Flask instance that is running our server essentially. So that is also common. You could name it either one you want, but just remember what you do name it. So I'm going to refer to it as server.py like I used. Now inside of this, we're going to create a route with hello world just to test it out first. So I'm going to start with from Flask, import Flask with a capital F. Then I'm also going to import render_template and request. Now that is different than requests that we've imported in the other file. I also need from weather import get current weather, and we'll use that in just a moment. Now let's go ahead and define our app. So we say app equals Flask, and then inside of the parentheses we do 2 underscores name 2 underscores, and that makes our app a Flask app. Now we define routes in Flask, and those are routes that we would access on the web. So I'm going to say @app.route, And now I just want slash. This would be the home page. But then also commonly, you should be able to access the home page if you go to /index or /index.html, for example. So I also want to add app.route, and then inside of this, I want /index. So both of these will apply. Now, following these routes, we define a function that will return something for the route. So I'll say def index parentheses, and now we'll go ahead and return something at this route. So I'm going to return. Here, I'm just going to say hello world to start out with. Just a simple example. But of course, we're not ready to run our file yet until we add our if name equals main, 2 more underscores. And now in this if name equals main, I'm going to start with app.run. And here I'm going to say the host is equal to, now inside of quotes, I'm just going to put 0.0.0.0, 4 zeros with dots in between. That's going to make it run on our local host. And then I'm going to say port is, I'll give it 8,000. So we're going to go to localhost port 8,000 to see the app after we start it. So we have a basic route here for our index or our home page, if you will, and we'll return hello world, and it's going to go ahead and start the server with this simple command. So let's run this file now. And here we see running on all addresses. So it should be running as expected. Now notice we get a warning here as well. This is a development server. Don't use it in a production deployment. So we'll want to fix that in the future as well. Let's go ahead and look at our web app right now that should say hello world, and we'll need to do that in the browser. I'm in Chrome and I have a new tab open. I'm going to type localhost, and then I'm going to want 8,000 after it. So localhost colon 8,000. I'll press enter. And right now we have our hello world as expected. Back in VS Code, I'm going to press Control C to quit the server for now. And then I'll close out the terminal window. And let's go ahead and adjust that. Remember that warning we saw that said, hey, this is a development server. We don't want that. We need to go ahead and replace that because we are going to deploy this app, essentially put it in production. So to fix this, let's open the terminal once again. And here I'm going to type pip install waitress. And now waitress is a package that is going to help serve our web app in production. So now that I've installed that, I've got a new dependency, and that means I need to recreate the requirements file. So once again, pip freeze greater than symbol requirements.txt. Press enter. It should now have added waitress to our requirements file. Let's check, and yes, there it is on line 14. And now that we have waitress added, let's go ahead and add it to our Flask app as well. So I'll say from waitress, then I'm going to import serve, and serve is what we need to serve our application. So let's replace this app.run here with serve, not server, just serve. And inside of this, we need to start with app, comma, and then we can still say host with the 4 zeros. We can still say port 8,000. All of that is fine. We're now ready to add that second HTML page I talked about. So click on index.html, click somewhere in the file, press Control A, which should select everything, Control C to copy everything. Then you can click away if you want to. Now let's create a new file here. With this new file, type weather.html, and inside of our weather.html, we'll get a jump start just by pressing Control V and pasting in everything we had inside of the index at first, and then I'm going to press Alt Z to wrap any of those lines down as well. Much of this will stay the same, but we're going to make a few changes. So we need the same CSS link, that's no problem. We do want to change the title of the page. So let's go ahead and select that, and then I'm going to press Control D, and I'm selecting the second instance here of get weather conditions because we're going to change both of these to say the same thing. I'll press backspace, and it deletes both of those, and I'll press 2 curly braces, then the word title, 2 more curly braces, and then the word weather. So whatever city is entered into that previous form, when we fill this page out, it could say Kansas City weather or Paris weather or wherever, but it's going to fill that in as we use this template. Now we still want the same form underneath because we want users to go ahead and be able to request more data or more cities weather if they choose to after they request the first one. But let's create some space here between the H1 and the form so we can put in some more information. Now I want a paragraph, and in this paragraph I'm going to use 2 curly braces once again, type the word status, 2 more curly braces, then and 2 more curly braces, type the word temp, 2 more curly braces. Now I'm using degrees again, so I'm going to use the abbreviation in HTML entity for degrees. If you wanted this changed to a different system, a different symbol, you can look that up on your own, but I'm going to use ampersand DEG semicolon, which will give the degree symbol. Now I'm going to just click on this line, press Shift Alt and the down arrow, and it copies all of that down. So now I'm going to say feels like, and after that I can delete status and, but I'll leave temp. I'm going to replace the word temp with feels underscore like. So these are the values that we are filling in when we get that weather information. But currently we're not handling the weather route, and when we make a request for weather, be it on the index.html page, we look for the weather route, or even on the weather page itself, we submit this form to the weather route, and then that data comes in and fills it out. So let's go to our server.py and handle a route for weather. So we need to go ahead and create that function and route underneath where we have the route for index. So I'm going to say app.route, and here I'm going to pass in /weather. Now, beyond that, let's go ahead and define our function. I'm going to call this get weather. Remember, our other function was get current weather, so I'll just call this get weather. Underneath this, we're going to get the city value first. Now that city value is going to come in from that form data. So here we can say request.args.get, and then we want to get the city value. So now we should have retrieved that, and we'll have weather underscore data going to equal get current weather, and we'll pass in the city value. So now that we have the weather, we want to send that data to that template. So here we're going to say return, and then we'll say render underscore template. And now inside of these parentheses, the first value we want is the template itself, which is weather.html. Now we need to pass all of the other values that we're going to use. Let me scroll up just a little so we have some room, and I'll say title equals weather underscore data. Then we want to use brackets and say name. After that, this would be the city name, of course, as well. After that, we want status equals, once again, we're going to have weather underscore data, brackets, and now we need to get some specific information that's in that JSON. And if you remember back to the lesson a couple of times before, we had a fairly large JSON object to navigate to get this data. So here we start looking at weather, and then we get the first element in weather, and so we use a 0 to get that. And then after that, we still need to get the description. And then after the description, I want to capitalize. So I'm going to pass capitalize here and call that as well. So that's going to be the status, such as cloudy or whatever the status is. I believe cloudy or few clouds was what we just had for Kansas City. Now let's go to temp. We'll set that equal to, and now this is an F string. So we start with F and quotes. Now curly braces, and we'll say weather underscore data once again, brackets. Now we already have double quotes on the outside, so we need to use single quotes, and we'll have main, and then we have temp. Once again, you need to refer to the JSON object to know how to get this data out of the object. And I'm not breaking all of that down here for you because I did it 2 lessons ago. We've got main temp, and I want to format this to that .1 afterwards, whatever it was, .7, .8. So I had like 97.3 degrees, for example. So I just want the one digit. So here I had colon, then a period, then 1, and F. So that's how I'm formatting that F string instead of a 2, which you've seen that format here before when we used the bank accounts, I believe. Okay, after that, another comma. And then finally, we need the feels like value. So feels underscore like, set this equal to another F string. So we have our double quotes, our curly brace inside of here, weather data, and then we'll once again have the single quotes around main, and then we'll have another bracket, single quotes around feels underscore like, and finally we're going to format this the same. So colon dot 1F. There's all of our information passed in. So you get how we're getting that out of that JSON object that is returned from our get current weather function. And after we do that, we're passing all of these in that we're using in the template. So the words we're defining here to the left are what's used inside of our weather template. So when we go back and look at weather, we just have to say title, status, temp, and feels like, and we can use those inside of our template. Okay, back in the server.py, one thing we didn't do is ever change our hello world, and we want to do this, but this will be fairly simple. All we need to do here is say render underscore template as well, and just pass in the index.html, because it's not receiving any of these like the weather page is. Now, if any of this went too fast, feel free to go back to the previous lessons. Also, of course, my code is available at the link in the description. And let's go ahead and run this code and make sure everything's working now as we expect it to. And I'm going to choose Run Python File. And now we're going to have to go back to the browser and look at the app. I'm back in the browser. I need to refresh our local host at port 8000. And now we have our get weather conditions. But what I notice is the CSS is not being applied. I may have a typo. Let's go ahead and check out the functionality first, though. So here I'm going to type in New York and press enter. And yes, we've got the New York weather, haze and 88.1 degrees. It feels like 93.2 degrees. This is all good. What's not good is we're missing the CSS being applied to the pages. Okay, back in VS Code, I've made a very simple mistake, easy to make. I am looking in the file name or in the folder name styles/style.css inside of both the HTML files. But when I look at the file tree, I actually named my subfolder here inside of static CSS because I had CSS on my mind and not the word styles. So let's go ahead and change the name of this folder. Should be able to right click and choose rename, which also it looks like F2 would have done that. And I'm going to switch this folder to styles. So I'm looking at static styles and then the file style.css. That will match what we put inside of both of our HTML files. So we save that. We should come back and go ahead. I stopped my server. If you haven't stopped it, you might not need to. I'm going to go ahead and restart this. And let's go ahead and reload the home page. So now the CSS applies like we expect it to. Let's go ahead and type in a city name. I'll put in Omaha and press enter. And yes, the weather app is working like we expect it to as well. However, this is the core usage. What if we entered something that would be unexpected? Say we just pressed the submit button without entering a city, or maybe we entered some spaces into the input and we submit. I think we'll probably get an error. Well, that's a surprise. Several spaces brought back a name from the API that I did not expect. Let's go ahead and hit submit without entering any spaces and see what we get. Now we have the internal server error that I expected. So let's go make a few changes to handle these edge cases in our code. We're back in VS Code and we need to go to the weather module to start out. And let's work with the module when it is called at the terminal line first, because this will be easier to debug and check as we go. What we need to do is get the input from the user and make sure that it is not an empty string, meaning a string that actually has no characters, but still the two quotes, or a string that is full of spaces only. So it would still be empty because then we could strip away those spaces and we would once again have an empty string. So to do that, we can put in a line of code here, and I'm going to put a note and just say check for empty strings or string with only spaces. So we know exactly what this line of code is doing. So I'll say if not, and then I'll use bool. And if you remember Boolean, that's true or false. Well, we're going to say we want content here, so it won't be empty. So we're looking at city, but before we look at the city, let's also strip away spaces. So I'm using the strip method here. So this strips away all those empty spaces because it would normally take away white space at the beginning and the end of a string. But what if there wasn't anything in between? So it's just going to strip away all of those spaces. And then we're going to make sure we have something left. So we can say if not bool, but first we're stripping away the spaces. And then we'll go ahead and put our colon for the if statement. Then we'll just say city equals, and let's give it a default value like Kansas City. And if you remember, we put in a default value for our function, and I put in Kansas City. However, that doesn't mean an empty string couldn't be passed to our function. And in that case, the default value wouldn't kick in. So this line of code is going to check for that. So now let's just run this module and see if it works when we do not enter anything or when I enter several spaces. So now we'll run the code. This is the error that we got in the web app. This is not the code that we're running. So I need to press Control-C a couple of times, and now it's running at the terminal. So it says get current weather conditions. Please enter a name. I'm going to drag this up just a little bit. I'm not going to enter a name at all. I'm just going to press enter. And now it returned the weather for Kansas City because that's the default value I gave in the code if we stripped away everything and the city name didn't exist. So as we look back here, city equals Kansas City. Let's do this one more time, and now let's do it with several spaces. So I will go ahead and run this code once again. I just pressed the up arrow to pull that line up and then press enter, and that's what ran the code here. Now please enter a city name. I'm going to enter in several spaces. Let's see what we get back. Do we get something from the API that is not Kansas City? No, we get Kansas City. So once again, we stripped away all of those spaces and then there was nothing left. And so then it defaulted to Kansas City. Feel free to put in your own city name here. But now that we have debugged this or worked around some edge cases inside of our weather module, we also need to apply something like this to our getWeather function inside of our Flask server. So let's go to the server.py file. Here's our getWeather function, and we're getting the value city from the arguments, essentially the parameters sent in the URL. And so after we get city, this is where we would need to check. And I really want to put in the exact same code here that we used in the weather module to check for that. So I'm just going to copy this that I put in on lines 23 through 25 with Control-C, go back to the server.py, and I'm going to put this code right here. So that is once again going to check for an empty string. After that, we're going to get the weather data from the API. But what if the API does not find the city that we pass in? What if we pass in some strange name? That could also be a problem. Let's go back once again to our weather module, and let's run this one more time, and I'll just put in a random string that I know is not a city name. So when it says enter city name, I'm just going to put in something strange like that. Let's see what we get back. Notice we get a different object instead of that JSON weather object. Now we get an object that has a code of 404, which means not found, and a message that says city not found. Likewise, if we would run our app here one more time, just this weather module, and I type in a name, or I'll just press enter so we get Kansas City information, we notice inside of our larger weather JSON object here that there is still a code right here. The code is 200. That means successful. So we could look for a successful code of 200 to know that our request has succeeded. Now there's nothing to fix in our weather module. It presented the object that was returned just fine. But inside of our server.py file, we actually need to handle that in case we don't get the object that we expect, because then we would get an error here as we attempted to get the name and the different weather values from the weather object if we did not have a weather object. So to handle this case, I'll put one more note underneath here and I'll say city is not found by API. And in that case, we'll say if not weather data, and then we'll look at that code value. Notice it doesn't have an E at the end, but it's abbreviating for code. Then it looks like COD actually, which is kind of funny, but nope, it is for code. If it's equal, or this is if it's not equal to 200. Notice 200 is not a string because that object didn't provide a string, it provided the number. So if our weather data code is not 200, then our request has not been successful and we will not have the weather data we expect. So in this case, I want to return a message simply saying city not found. Now we could do this just like we did with hello world and say city not found. And I'll save this for now, but instead let's create one more template to handle that. So in our templates folder, I'll just click on index.html and then the new file icon, and I'll call this city-not-found.html. And now I'm going to go to the index.html file and press Control-A to select all and Control-C to copy. From there, I'll go back to the city-not-found file and press Control-V to paste everything in. Also Alt-Z so it wraps down. Now there's not much to change here, but I'm going to change the title. And once again, after selecting Get Weather Conditions, press Control-D so it selects the second version of that, which is down below in the body of the page. Here I'm going to type City Not Found. After that, I'm going to put an H2 underneath City Not Found in the body and just put Try Again with a question mark. And then we'll once again leave this same form so the user isn't stranded on this page. They could once again enter in a city name. Maybe they just had a typo. So this will be our city not found page. So after creating this template, let's go back to the server.py, and now we can render that template here instead of the city not found string. So I'll have render underscore template once again, and now we're just going to pass in the city-not-found.html file. Now with this new code in place, we should be able to handle those possibilities, those edge cases as we would call them, inside of our web app as well. So if our files are saved, let's open the terminal once again, and we want to run the server.py file. So I'm just going to press play here and run this file, and we can see it's running here. Let's go back to the browser and check it out. So we had an internal server error before, so I'm going to remove everything that came after the localhost 8000. Now press enter, and it should once again reload the app. I'm ready to put in a town or a city name, so I'll put in Austin, press enter, and yes, it's working like expected. So now if I just press submit without entering anything, we get the Kansas City weather because that's what I put in for default. And if I put in some random characters that don't make any sense and press enter, we get our city not found template, and it says try again. So I could try again. I'll enter in many spaces, which actually has no content whatsoever. Press enter. And once again, we get the Kansas City weather. So that's really what we wanted to do. It handles those. And notice up here, the city equals value, when I put in all the spaces, is represented as plus symbols inside of the URL, which is a little interesting. Let's go ahead and enter something else. It's just blank. And then notice it's just city equals and nothing comes after it, but we still get the Kansas City weather. And now with our code feeling like it's complete, it's ready to deploy to the web. I'm back in VS Code, and now we're going to work with Git and GitHub. And if you're not familiar with Git and GitHub, you may want to stop the tutorial now, learn about those before you try to proceed and deploy your web app, because I'm not going to go into all of the details of how they work. I'm just going to show you what I do, because this is not a Git or GitHub tutorial, although I do have those on my channel. Okay, so here we've already initialized our Git repository earlier in this tutorial. Now with it initialized, I see some files over here, meaning they're new, they're green in my file tree, and I'm getting ready to add those. But I'm also looking at my file tree going, hey, this PyCache folder has been created. That happens when we use modules, we import modules, then it just caches some things to work more efficiently. But we really don't want to send that to GitHub either. So let's once again go to the gitignore file, and inside of there, I'm just going to list the 2 underscores, PyCache, and 2 more underscores, and save. And now that is also not going to be sent to GitHub with our Git repository. So once again, it's already initialized. So now I just need to add the files to the repository. So I'll say git add and type a period. That means all. So I'm going to add all of those files. Now I'm going to commit the files to the repository. So I say git commit -m for message, and I'm going to say first commit. Press enter. Now all of those green files turn white in my file tree, and they have been committed to my repository. Now they haven't been sent to GitHub yet, so we need to go to GitHub and create a repository to send them to. Okay, I'm on GitHub and I have an account here already. If you don't, you'll need to create one, and then I want to click New for a new repository. Now I have a paid account because of my job. I need to be able to do several things that only a paid account can do. However, if you have a free account, you can only have public repositories, I believe. However, I'm going to set mine to private because I'm just going to use it for this tutorial. So here I'm putting in the repository name, and I'm going to put in python-weather. And so you could name yours whatever you want to. After that, I'm just going to scroll down and create the repository. After it does that, it's going to give us this page of instructions. And I'm really only interested in this part that says, or push an existing repository from the command line. And that's what we have back in VS Code. We have an existing Git repository. So I'm going to copy, just by clicking this icon here, all 3 of these commands, and then we'll go run those commands inside of our terminal in VS Code. Okay, I'm back in VS Code. I'm going to type clear first here in the terminal just to clear everything else out. Now when I right click, it's going to run the first 2 of those 3 commands, and it's going to wait for me to press enter on the last one. So I right click, runs the first one, it runs the second one, and now it's waiting for me to push, this is a git push, the repository here on my computer in VS Code to GitHub. So when I press enter, that's exactly what's going to happen, and it quickly sent those files to that GitHub repository. Now I'm back in the browser at the repository. I'll click the repository title here near the top left, and we can see these files are now in the repository at GitHub. So now we want to go to render.com, where we're going to deploy this web app, and it will pull these files from our GitHub repository into Render on its own. We can set that up, so let's go do it. And now I'm at render.com. If you don't have an account here, you can sign up for one for free. I'm already logged in, so it is just showing me the dashboard button. I'm going to click that dashboard button, and now I am logged in, and I can go ahead and create a new web service, which is what we want. So by creating the new web service, it's going to give us a list of our connected repositories. Now I have connected my GitHub to my account, and you could do the same. If you don't see it, like it's offering to connect GitLab, which is another service like GitHub, to my account as well. So you might see it over on the right if you're not connected. So I'm connected, and now I immediately see my python-weather repository because I just created it 2 minutes ago. I'll click the connect button, and it will start to pull the code in from GitHub, and now I can set up my web service or my web app here inside of render.com. I'm going to name this the same thing, python-weather. I don't need to change the region. I'm on the main branch in my repository, so that's fine. This root directory is optional. I don't need to change that. We will be using Python 3, and we have been using Python 3, so that's fine. Where we have the build command, pip install -r requirements.txt. That's good because we do have a requirements file, but we might also want to update pip, as we have had some notifications about pip before needing updated. So let's go ahead and put in pip install And we only need 2 L's there. Then I need -U, capital U, for that upgrade, and then pip, and then 2 ampersands, and then it can do the next command, which would be our requirements.txt. So I just want both of those in there. Now as we come down to the start command, here our start command is going to be Python 3, and then we're going to run our server.py file. But we're not quite finished yet. Let's scroll down just a little bit further. We're using this free instance, which is fine. But as we scroll down, we need the advanced because we're going to add our environment variable. Remember, we have an API underscore key in our .env file in development. We need to take the value of that and put it right here. Back in VS Code, I'll close the terminal and click on my .env file. Here's my current API key value. Control C to copy that. Let's go back to that dashboard and we can put it in right here. But we also need one other environment variable. And no, we did not have it in development, but render needs it. Render needs to know what version of Python we have been using. So we'll say Python version. And now, if you remember how to check your Python version, you could do that and put it in here. If not, let's quickly do that for you. So back in VS Code, let's control in the backtick to open this up. I'm going to just type pi, lowercase once again. If you're on Mac or Linux, type Python 3, I believe. But after that, you need --version. And then when I press enter, you can see I've got Python 3.11.2. You want to enter in whatever version you have been using. So here I'm going to put in 3.11.2. And remember, I am going to change my API key value. So don't try to use mine. Make sure you go to openweathermaps.org and get your own. Okay, now that we've entered everything, I believe we're ready to scroll down here and create web service. So let's click that. It will start to deploy and it will give us quite a few messages here in this window. I'll come back when it's finished. I'm back and render says your service is live. So that's what we wanted to hear. Let's scroll up and we can see our URL for our Python web app right here. It's at python-weather.onrender.com. So whatever you named your repository or your project here in Render is probably what's here before .onrender.com. Let's go ahead and click the URL. And now we see our web app is actually on the web and you can share it with your friends. Let's go ahead and enter in another city name here. I'm going to enter in Santa Fe, press enter. And there's the weather tonight. It's getting a little chilly in Santa Fe. Maybe a warmer destination like Houston. And press enter. And yes, the Houston weather is much warmer. It feels like 95 right now. So everything is once again working. We can even check out not entering a city. And I get Kansas City. Depends what city you put in for yours. I'll enter in something that doesn't make any sense, and of course that shouldn't be found, and we get our city not found template. So I'm happy with the results here. I hope you are too, and moreover, congratulations on completing the Python for Beginners course and on completing this project. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you, and thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.